the guest for this interview is Sharon Thirkettle, an artist, or actually now retired artist in the Calgary and vicinities, but really has traveled the world to do a lot of her art. And I'll just get her to talk about herself a little bit and the type of art she does, and then we'll get into a bit of a conversation around art and AI. Well, I'll let Sharon kick it off.
Okay. Hi, Cam. As he said, my name is Sharon Thirkettle. I have been a working professional artist 40 years. And by professional, I mean actually selling my work privately and through various galleries. At the height, I was in 5 different galleries across Canada and having to keep track of where that work was going, size, what people were wanting, and that sort of thing. And it has been a completely evolving little business, if you want to call it that, over that period of 40 years. I have stopped painting due to some health reasons, but I still pursue some creative endeavors moving towards art quilts and things that do not require me to be outside where I love to be. Most of my painting was plein air painting where I was on location. We have traveled the world extensively, and I would always sketch while we were traveling. Not many of those sketches became full paintings when we came home because it wasn't where the market was. But it gave me an opportunity to always look at to view the landscape and what I was considering. Having said that, landscape was my primary interest. I did have a period of time where I did some clay work in an art form, which was an exhibit at the Science Center many years ago. They were never functional pieces, they were art pieces. So I have worked primarily in oil and acrylic on canvas. I consider when you say classical art, I consider that classical art along with sculpture and other genres. So I guess that's important to establish when we say classical art. What do you mean? That's what I would view it as. I consider photography an art form, but I don't know if I'd put that into the classical art definition.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. I think that's sort of one of the reasons you came to mind as a person to talk to about this was, as I say, the whole idea of the acrylic, the painting type of thing on canvas. I also consider in terms of sort of that classical piece, the way of the art's been done for many, many years. And I think there's other ways that art's been done that maybe when we talk about AI, we'll influence it a little bit more. And maybe there's more repercussions for that type of art
Mm.
when it comes to AI versus sort of the more classical pieces, which can't be, I think, as easily digitized. I think if you take the painting behind you, I see that, yeah, you can take the
Mhm.
colors and the shapes and that and digitize that part of it. But there's another part of that when you're looking at acrylics. There's the textures you see and those type of things. And I think that's
And I
much
think
harder.
and I think as the actual painter, as the person doing it, that's where I have a problem relating the new AI work to the classical work in the field. And I guess it comes down to why am I painting in the first place? For me, as the artist, putting brush to canvas, it's to try and convey an emotional response to what I'm looking at. It's not just to reproduce what I'm looking at because I could take the photograph for that. And photography has influenced the view of art too and what people desire because people now, I don't think, are buying art the same way. My art because they can take a photograph that they like, they can use AI with Lightroom and different things to change it, make it perfect in their eyes, and then they can print it on canvas and put it on a wall. But like where's the emotional response to that? And so there is one AI artist that I look at the work. It's Rafik Anadol, and I think the work is stunning, but I kind of question, well, where's the emotion in that to doing it? You put in a few I mean, and I don't know that much about it, but you put in all these programs, and, like, I know at, MoMA in New York, he put in all the paintings that were there and then set up a program, and there's all these beautiful, moving images that come out, but, like, they're beautiful, but they don't have that emotional response for me.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of something that as Sammy introduced this topic, she's been talking about this for quite a while in terms of using this or using a similar type of topic at this particular competition. I think the classical art piece, that's what really resonated with me in terms of you've got, I think, this art that does evoke emotion, especially from the artist, but I also think from the viewer. And I think is that part of, I guess, the question in terms of what AI or the influence AI might have on the art world. And just sort of this whole idea around classical art. Is it becoming less visible, or is it just sort of, or is art itself just simply evolving into a different place? Any thoughts sort of on that?
I think it's both. I think it's definitely becoming less visible for multiple reasons. One is we're not even teaching, very few students are exposed to it in North American society. It may be different in European society because I find when I'm traveling in Europe and going to art markets and stuff, the type of conversations you get into are very different with young people than they are here. Young people here, unless they really choose to, and it's very difficult to take it as an option in high school because you're so restricted with what you need. A lot of young people have not taken art now for over 20 years. And so that's affecting people when they mature. And do they even go to galleries? Are they buying work, or are they wanting the Walmart version where they can go in and they want something pretty for their walls, but they want it at a very cheap price and they don't see the value? I mean, the last few years I was painting, it always came down to essentially, give me a deal. How many hours did that take you to do? And I would say 40 years, because it's 40 years of experience of developing the skill. And I don't think because they have had background in the arts, they have no appreciation for the fact that this is a talent that needs working on and building on. I mean, you don't ask a lawyer how many years he's worked, or how many doctors, how many years they've worked to refine their craft, to associate value to it. Right. So I think so we don't have the education background, so there isn't the value to it. I think also galleries are just, because of the economic situation our world finds itself in right now, they can't afford the rent. Are taking 50% off the sale of the artist's paintings. More and more of them are closing, and even full-time galleries are having to cut down. Like, I don't know, I couldn't name ones, but I know there's many in Europe that just can't afford to stay open anymore. So the more we close down opportunity, the less people are going to be exposed to it. Having said that, I think it is evolving as well. And it's evolving because of computer tools and so on. People can do it more themselves. And the photography is an example of it.
Yeah, no, and I think that there's a big thing, and I do a lot of I do some graphic work for some of the projects I'm working with, and yeah, the tools have evolved so much that it makes it relatively easy to do. But as I say, I think in terms of that, I don't consider that art. I think I think I've got, like you, a little bit more in terms of this whole idea around classic and what it looks like. And yeah, there's some modern stuff, and some of it, yeah, it looks pretty, but is there that emotion part of it? So I think that's a big piece of it. I wonder, just in terms of your thoughts, in terms of how do we sort of move forward a little bit in terms of maybe revitalizing or preserving some of sort of the artistic heritage while still sort of moving forward in terms of some of the innovation piece of it, where software and those types of things are taking over technology. Any thoughts on that?
No, not really. I think if you made museums free to go into, again, if you remove some of the economic barriers, so that people can go in and look at classical art and maybe just develop an appreciation for it. People can always walk into galleries at any point in time. There's no cost involved in that until you want to make a purchase. I think part of it is developing the appreciation, but we also have to associate value to owning a piece of art. And what is it, if you feel an emotional response to it? I mean, there's so much competition these days for where anybody spends their money, including putting food on the table. Art is always the first thing to disappear and the last thing to come back. And I've been saying that for my 40 years of painting because we have had financial crises in my 40 years of painting, throughout my career. And there's been years where I've talked to colleagues and we haven't sold anything. But we're struggling with putting food on the table too. So I don't know how you equate that value unless you develop an appreciation for it. Having said that, I have used AI myself, not to create a painting, but to stimulate the creative exercise.
Yeah, no, and I think I've done that a fair amount too, and I think that that's something that as sort of this AI comes online a lot more, it's trying to figure out sort of where the value of it is in terms of sort of stimulating the creative side, but also the keeping. And I think with my case teams and those types of things that I've coached, the whole idea is how do we get people to deliver their creativity that may be augmented a little bit by AI and that type of stuff rather than just sort of, yeah, I'm just going to throw all this stuff in, it's going to produce something, and that's what I'm going to spout out type of thing.
Yeah,
I
and I
think
think
that's
and I think the actual like when I used AI for the creative inspiration, I still saw that I would have to have the hands-on to do it. I mean, there's that human touch to it, and I think that's where the AI is missing. I mean, and it's like Rafiq Anadol's work with all the computer images. Well, fine, this is all beautiful, but where is that human touch? Because it's the humanity of me working beside another artist where we're both looking at the same thing, we're both using the same materials, but how we want to express what we're seeing is very different.
yeah.
And that is in human touch. It's in terms of amount of paint, color of paint, brush stroke, and they're very fine nuances. And yes, you might be able to do that with AI, but I still think the actual doing it yourself is different.
No, I totally agree with that. And as say, a lot of mine is writing, and it's I'm putting in that piece of writing, it's producing something out, and then I'm going back through it and revising because it does come up with some really good ideas and some
Mhm.
different ways to say stuff when I'm writing. But at the same time, I want to keep it my to be sort of credible in terms of my work, etc.
Well, that's right,
Um,
because people used to look at my paintings and they would say, "That's a Thirkettle painting." And I would say, "Well, how do you know that?" And they said, "Well, we just do. It's how you've handled the paint, it's the colors you're using. And because I'm in the moment of doing it, I'm not aware of that."
Yeah, no, and I can see that, and I think when I've gone to galleries or that, yeah, I know that's a Thirkettle painting, just what it looks like. Or when I'm on Instagram and you put something up on Instagram, I don't even have to look at who's put it up. I know it's
Mhm.
Sharon that's posted
Well,
that.
it's because you've seen so many.
But I think that's a big thing. I think that sort of brings us into a nice question because I think one of the big things is that whole idea around protecting things like copyright and protecting the artist's copyright and sort of preventing that idea that I can go to AI and say, I don't want to go to Sharon's house and buy art, or I don't want to pay her for it. But I can just sort of go to AI and say, yeah, I want you to produce something that's reminiscent of a Thirkettle painting or something like that. Thoughts on that area?
It's always been a problem. It's been a problem forever. We've had evolutions of copyright law in Canada. Whoopie-doo. Who enforces it? And, as a small local artist who is fortunate to have sold their work, I don't have funds to pay a lawyer. to get into big copyright lawsuits if I was even aware that someone was copying my art. In years past, it's been China that has been particularly notorious at hiring, and paying pennies to artists to reproduce artists' art. How do you find out about that? I mean, it's only if you happen to be there or you see something posted. So it's always been a problem of integrity and how you protect it. And I don't know that we still have those same problems, even with AI. How are you going to? I don't know if someone copies something from when I posted on social media. I have no idea of knowing that. So, yes, I'm protected, but it doesn't mean anything.
I love that answer because often I do a lot of advising with students still on that, and especially on entrepreneurial types of ideas. And they come out and say, "Yeah, we're going to go and get patent protection. We got copyright protection or something like that." And I sort of like, "Yeah, that just means you get to pay lawyers to protect your stuff now." Right. And I think that's something that a lot of students don't really realize is that, yeah, it's there, but it is very extensive, and it's hard to know what everybody's doing, and I
And
love
you
that.
and you could win your lawsuit and the person
No,
can't afford to pay you. So you still haven't accomplished anything.
yeah, no, no, and I think that's one of the things, and I think it's a big misconception that I see from a lot of students in terms of when at the University of Calgary, I do their NT 317 program and they come up and talk to me about ideation or starting to pitch their ideas. And one of the big things is we're going to protect this through this. And I sort of like, yeah, how are you going to do that? Right? Did you put money in your budget that you're telling me how much of that is there to do the protection? You got money there, yeah, to get that and whatever. But that's not really protecting you. And having done a fair amount of stuff on Canadian, in particular, Canadian copyright pieces, legislation, and that, there's big holes in it.
Mhm.
They update it, but they update it still 10 years, 20 years behind the technology piece. I think the other thing that you mentioned a little bit earlier, and I sort of see this just in terms of the difference between North America and Europe. And one of the things, and I know Cheryl, my wife, loves when we go to Europe because of all of the historical pieces, places, and that are still there. And particularly in Western Canada, nothing's older than 100 years to start with.
That's right. Mhm.
And we rip down everything. I wonder, do you think that might influence sort of people from those different cultures in terms of how they see art or how they see sort of, especially in terms of that idea of classical art?
Perhaps, but I also think it's the appreciation comes from education. And it's education in art and music and the written word, and yes, having it around you, but also appreciating it and living with it, as you say, having it in your environment. I mean, we have beautiful landscape around here. We don't have spectacular architecture
No.
in every corner. I mean, we have our new library, which is stunningly beautiful. Yeah, that's one building. But I also think they live with it around them. They live in smaller spaces. It's not who has the biggest house and the biggest backyard. I mean, they can live in 2 and 3-room apartments, and they'll still have original art in their home because it's important that they appreciate that and they see value in that. And I think that's partly a generational thing that's been passed on throughout families, and more of an afternoon of, well, if you live in a big urban area, let's go to a museum or a gallery and have that around you. Here it's, well, let's go to the outdoors. It's not that it's not the outdoors is of great value. We just perhaps have more choice around here.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. And I think the other thing, you talked a little bit about affordability, and I know in the UK in particular, a few countries in Europe, I think Washington, DC is probably another good example, that the museums are free.
Yeah.
And a lot of other places, yeah, they're very expensive to get into. And I take New York City in particular, where there's admission to get into the museums in New York City. And again, I think Paris, places I've been, yeah, there's those admission charges. So I'm just sort of wondering in terms of, is there something sort of, as you sort of look back on your career, et cetera, is there sort of something in that in terms of, does that sort of change sort of how people view art or view those things that we put in museums a little bit differently in terms of the value? Because as I say, in London, you can go to pretty well every museum, walk in, there's no charge for admission, whereas that doesn't happen in a lot of other places.
Sure, I know exactly what you mean. I mean, I think it's provinces, countries acquiring collections which would be available to people. I mean, I know there is in Alberta, there's a Federation of Art where they will buy various pieces, but again, budgets have been cut, right? So the variety and the number of and the representation of artists has diminished over the years. It's diminished in the 40 years I've been showing. The grants to encourage artists, I mean, I was awarded a grant to help me go to the Arctic years ago and then have a show about it and go into schools. Those funds have been cut dramatically as well, if not exclusively. And of course, so there was an example of me as an artist, having worked in the field, going in and talking to kids in the school setting. This is a real job that someone has, they love what they're doing, but showing the kids and showing them pictures of working in the field. Well, again, I couldn't do that necessarily just on my own. Again, it comes down to values and money and how we want to do that. But I think if we can establish collections of some sort that people can visit without having to pay for them, that's at least a first thing that we can do.
I think that was a much better answer than the question that came out. Well, I think you got to what I was trying to get around in terms of the question. I wasn't really sure what the question was, but you got
Okay.
around to the pieces that I really wanted to pull out of that. I think the other thing that sort of we've seen, and I think the biggest example that I always can think of is Bill Gates. Bill Gates went and bought the digital rights to a whole bunch of art pieces so that he could put them on monitors and they could change. He could change the what art was displayed in his house at
Mhm.
times. I wonder, have you thought, or do you have any thoughts in terms of this whole idea that, yeah, you've got the paint on canvas, right? And you got that traditional piece. But in terms of sort of the idea of sort of creating sort of digital rights for those pieces, et cetera, do you have any thoughts sort of that way?
I don't know a lot about it. Is that what would be referred to as an NFT?
I would think, yeah, more like an NFT.
Okay, I have been approached on social media, maybe about half a dozen times over the last maybe 5 to 7 years about would I be open to discussion and I have just shut it down immediately. It's not, and maybe it's because of where I'm at in this stage of my career. I mean, I'm 75 years old. I'm at the point where I'm trying to divest myself of the works that I have left because it comes down to what is going to happen when I do pass with all these pieces. And so I have not wanted to get into another business dynamic of how to explore that. I mean, I'm on the back end of things. So I can't really comment other than I had no interest in pursuing that. I mean, at this point, it's hard enough even to think of how to divest of things because there are limited ways of doing that. And you talk about, classical art and maintaining value. One of the things, I mean, when we downsized our house, I actually burned 100 paintings. And people are horrified and say, well, how could you do that? And I said, well, I can't risk them going into a landfill and somebody taking them out and selling them for peanuts, not necessarily even putting them on the wall. But if you want to, if there's, again, it comes back to value. If you've created this work and people have invested in it, how do you maintain that value? Like, why even do it? You've got to protect the investors that you have, and not saying that it's gonna make them money. I truly don't believe that. I mean, I've not 0.001% of the population of artists, right, where they're gonna make money. People, I hope, have bought it and enjoyed it because they felt an emotional response to what they were doing, and the small amount of the hourly wage they have paid me to buy the painting allows them to enjoy that. And so, but again, I am now sitting with 80 pieces of work at the end. And so what do I do with those? And so that's more where I'm at my stage of career.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons. I think one of the reasons I sort of thought of you as talking about this is because that's a discussion we kind of had in the past in terms of it's about sort of this whole idea of the reputation of the artist. And I was talking to another artist I know that does stained glass, and she sent me an email the other day. I asked her a few questions, and her big thing was, yeah, sort of reputation, and how do we protect sort of the reputation of the artist, the reputation of. I think one of the things she sent me a little bit of an article on protecting the reputation and copyright of national renowned artists or something like that. I can't remember the exact title. It was quite interesting in terms of, yeah, this whole idea of it comes down to reputation and sort of
Mhm.
protecting that value type. And maybe any thoughts in terms of does AI erode that in any sense? Or there's probably a possibility of that.
I guess there's a possibility. I don't know. I mean, how would it unless someone was purposely trying to recreate, and pose an AI piece as a Sharon Thirkettle piece?
Yeah.
I think that would have to be intentional. I don't really see how it could be accidental. I mean, there's millions of artists in the world if you're going back historically and putting them all in. I mean, I think it would be quite accidental, like, that something would come out unless somebody was purposefully
Sweet.
trying to do that. I can't see it at this stage of AI. Maybe, that's constantly evolving too, right?
Yeah. No, and I think that's a really good answer to that. And I think just sort of have the whole idea of having this discussion a little bit is to give the students a little bit of a perspective of an artist, because I think
Mhm.
that's one of the things, as you mentioned earlier. I don't think they've had a lot of that exposure in their education, and that type of thing. And I think the other piece of it is, sort of when you talk to it, it's one of the things that when I work with students, and I've done the case teams for 2 decades or something now, and they're introduced to something new every time, and it's sort of there's that big learning curve, and I hope the whole idea is to give them a little bit of information and a little bit of perspective in terms of just sort of where people that do this come from, sort of
Well,
what
and it
they're
would be
thinking.
and it would be interesting to see what the 20-year-olds think,
Yeah. And I think
you
we'll give you
know?
that opportunity. I think we're going to record stuff. So if you're interested,
Yeah, because I don't know how many like, it's interesting, our granddaughter is extremely talented, art-wise, but also in other areas, and so we've talked to her about whether she would use her art, and she said, "Well, no, I can't make a living doing that, I need to be doing something else." Well, the bottom line is you could never make a living doing it. You you usually did it for other reasons or had other, people supporting you in the background, but I don't know that it's as culturally acceptable to be doing it or viewed as culturally acceptable to be viewing it as a profession these days, again, because young people aren't as exposed to it.
yeah. No, I think that makes for a really good point in terms of sort of where we are, where sort of this industry is going to some extent. Because I think it's always been, as you say, that 0.0001% that truly it's. And then there's others that, yeah, it becomes that supplementary income, and then there's others that it's a way to have enjoyed passing some time, and
Mhm.
sort of the internal. intrinsic values that it has with you. But I think the big thing, and I think the big thing you brought out was just sort of this whole idea around value and sort of both the emotional value and sort of the value that it brings to the artist and to the viewer, et cetera, which I think is really important that um, as I talk to the students next week as they start to put stuff and mentor them. I think that's something that gives me a little bit of an area to sort of focus on and to talk to them because, as I say, with my case comp background, I sit there and talk to them about culture and corporate
Mhm.
cultures and all that. And I think that's the piece that, yeah, that's the piece that really registers. And I think to take that.
And I think the thing with a classical artist, even though there's the starving classical artist, you have to have been passionate about what you're doing. Otherwise, why would you get up in the morning and go down to the studio and work every single day? You are working only for yourself. You're hoping that someone is going to see it at some point and appreciate the passion of what you've tried to put into it by expressing it, in whatever form you do, whether it's canvassing, glass, whatever. I mean, I'm not naive to think I'm just doing it for myself because I couldn't afford to buy paint if that were the case. But at the same time, that's the human element of the passion that is not there with AI. And so I think that young people have to really consider if you're talking about, a hobby artist is passionate about what they're doing too, but it's maybe not to quite the same degree. They don't have to get up every day in the morning and go and work in the studio. Like they might, but it's not the same. I don't think it's passion to the same level.
And I think that's a really interesting point.